This message comes to you from King's Church Wirral, UK. We hope that as you listen, you will be encouraged, blessed and inspired. So I've got a question. Who here has been to New Wine? Yeah? Woohoo! So those who don't know what it is, it's a summer Christian camp the church has gone to over the last several years. And basically it's thousands of people from all over the country. They come together to camp in a huge field, like a big showground. There are hundreds of seminars that you can go to, art workshops, and lots of time to just hang out on site. New Wine is amazing. Our family absolutely love it. So there is an evening meeting, for those who don't know, about 7 o'clock each night. But there's one thing that you must remember to take with you. Because for the majority of people, they have no access to electricity on site. There's no street lights. There's no random lighting from anywhere. So that one thing that you must remember to bring with you is a torch. I haven't got one to show you. I suppose you don't need it to stay the lights on. And it's so easy to forget, speaking from experience. Because before you leave, it sometimes is blue sky, sometimes rain and cloudy, but sometimes blue sky, but it's light. So a torch, you don't even think about having to take a torch with you. But when you get out that meeting about 9 o'clock, it is dark. And so trying to find your tent in the dark amongst thousands of other people with maybe the same tent as you, is the first test. The second is trying to get there in one piece. You manoeuvre past all the guy ropes, those ones that accidentally trip you up because you don't see them. And so if you get back to your tent in one piece without a torch, you've done amazing. So you take a torch and you've done well. So like at New Wine, where there is no electricity, without your torch, it's dark and you can't see clearly, as well as camping in a tent takes us back to the Israelites in the wilderness. But they didn't even have torches, so it would have been really dark. So the Israelites, at this point, the Israelites had just been released from slavery in Egypt. This is the time when God sent Moses to perform amazing, the plagues basically, to come upon Pharaoh and the Egyptians. He followed God's instruction and went ahead and did what God was asking him to do. And eventually, after a lot of things happening, Pharaoh eventually led to the Israelites leaving the camp. So they began their journey to the land that God had promised them. When he spoke to Abraham, this land, this promised land flowing with milk and honey. But for various reasons, particularly the Israelites complaining and disobedience, led to their journey taking 40 years in the wilderness. But it was this time that the Israelites experienced God's provision of water and bread. And it was also this time that the Israelites were led by God in a pillar of cloud during the day and a pillar of fire at night. God leading them in this way had led to their survival. When they were being chased by the Egyptians, he put a barrier in the way so they couldn't see the Israelites. It also led to them coming through the wilderness. Because at night when it was dark, it would have been pitch black. But God was the light to the people. So skip forward a few thousand years and we join Jesus in John 8 at the Feast of Tabernacles, which is where we read our second I Am of the series. So some of you might have guessed it, you all might have guessed it, but I'll go on to say what it is in a minute. The Feast of the Tabernacles was 8 days of celebrating God's leading, his provision and his protection in the wilderness. This wilderness which I've just mentioned, those 40 years, this feast celebrated all that they knew of God during this time. In John 6, as Ben shared last week, Jesus declared himself to be the bread of life, God's provision of food in the wilderness. In John 7, Jesus declares that if anyone is thirsty, come to me and drink. This goes back to when God instructed Moses, when in the wilderness, to strike the rock to bring water for the Israelites when they were in the desert thirsty. Jesus is saying, I can satisfy your thirst just like I did back then. And now we see the third element in John 8 verse 12, which follows on from this. Jesus declares himself to be the light. He says, I am the light of the world. The significance of this is amazing and yet so intentional. Jesus is, and the Pharisees know it, declaring himself to be the Messiah. He is saying, I am the light, which is what the Israelites in the wilderness knew to be God. Jesus is declaring this during the Feast of Tabernacles, which, as we have said, is the time that the Israelites remembered and celebrated God being the pillar of light, guiding them through the wilderness. He was declaring this in the courtyard. It was known as the Court of Women. It was the outer forecourt of the temple. And this was the place where both men and women were allowed to be. Women weren't allowed to permitted to be in everywhere, but they were in this court of women allowed to be. It would have been packed, this court. People estimate about 10,000 people. But also at this festival, there were 3 75-foot high candlesticks. So I looked up 75-foot high, see if we can get an idea of what that looked like. And they said like 5 minivans. So imagine a candle 5 minivans high or 2 buses high. That is one big candle. I've never seen a candle that big. But the light from these candlesticks would give light to all the courtyards of Jerusalem. The light of the candle then would be extinguished on the 8th and final day of the festival. So again, removing of this light on the last day of the festival would have made it very dark in Jerusalem. For at this time, again, they didn't have electricity, they didn't have the torches that we have today. So in case it's not clear, Jesus is declaring himself to be the light of the world during the Feast of Tabernacles, which celebrated God's light to lead the people in the wilderness, which would have kept them, guided them, and protected them. So at this festival, they would have had a week of light being shone from these 75-foot candles. And now it's the final day of the feast, where the lights have been extinguished. And it's at this moment that Jesus proclaims, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. So they just had a week of light, and all of a sudden, no more. And Jesus declares, I am the light. The image of light and dark is so contrasting. I mean, the difference it makes when you go into a room and there's no lights on, it's pitch black, you can't see. But when a light comes on, the light gives way to sight. But Jesus, in his proclamation of who he is saying, just like you have bore witness to there being light and no more light, I am saying to you, I am the light, and I never go out. I am promising you something so much better than these physical, temporary, big 75-foot candles. I'm promising you something so much better than that. That is temporary. But I never go out. To the Israelites, they had the pillar for those 40 years, but Jesus is saying, I never go out. I will always be the light. But in his declaration, Jesus is not only just saying that he is a light that can never go out, that can never be extinguished, but through his light, he brings life. As Ben shared last week, there are 2 meanings to life. Obviously, one being, if you're breathing, you're alive, which is good. I can see everyone breathing. That's good to no one's dead in the room. But the second is Zoe life. Now, Zoe life, Ben touched on last week as well, is this idea of the God kind of life, the rich, abundant, divine nature of God, his fullness of love, joy, and power. And the life here that Jesus is talking about is the Zoe life. So do you currently experience the rich, abundant, divine nature of God? Do you experience the fullness of love, joy, and power? Because Jesus is saying you can. But this is where the choice begins. For God is who he is, and he offers you this life, but what will you choose? You see, when Jesus says, I am the light of the world, he goes on to say, whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. The choice is this. Will you follow the light? Will you follow Jesus? To not just look at the light, to not just hear about the light, but to follow it. Because ultimately, if you aren't following his leading, you are outside of his leading, bluntly, that means you're in darkness. In Psalm 119, verse 105, it says, your word is a lamp to guide my feet and a light for my path. So just like the torch at New Wine brought light to help guide everyone back to their tents, following Jesus, his ways will light your path. But the other thing about having a torch is you can't always see the whole journey. You have to keep the torch in front of you and take each step at a time. And if you move it slightly, you're like, oh, where's my stepping? You can look with the torch at the immediate step in front of you and working out if you can just walk, or if there's a hill coming up or something that's going to trip you up. That torch will help show you that immediate step in front so you know what to do next, until eventually you find your destination. But if you move the torch to the side or behind you, the light has gone out from the path that is in front. Like the Israelites, we are on a journey. Who knows how long we have left? But we are all here if we are breathing. We are all on a journey to our final destination. And along that journey, at times, it may feel like a wilderness. It may feel like with the Israelites that you are not where you are meant to be. You're in between, and that in between can feel painful, it can feel hard, it can feel tough. Or right now you might just be walking straight ahead, no obstacles in the way, but then something might have changed, or something might change. But regardless of what we are currently experiencing, Jesus is saying, I am the light, follow me. You don't have to stumble in the darkness and fall over the guy ropes. You don't have to feel lost or on your own, for I will guide you. I will lead you. But will you follow me? Because I will lead you to your final destination. You see, you might just know the next step. You might not be able to see the whole journey mapped out for you, and I think sometimes it's a good thing, because I think if we saw everything that was ahead of us, might create a bit of worry or fear, or sort of thinking, how can I get there myself and do it on my own? But instead, God just gives us that next step. But will you follow him with that next step? But what about if he asks you to do something outside of your comfort zone? Oh, Jesus wouldn't do that. Jesus wouldn't ask me to do anything outside my comfort zone. What if the next step is challenging? It just seems too difficult. Or it's outside, you feel like that's not my gifting, that's not my strength. Or what if it's something you just don't want to do? Will you still follow him? Or like what happens with the Israelites, what if your next step is something that is countercultural? Will you still follow him? if it means going against the crowd, maybe looking a bit weird, having people talk about you because of what you're being asked to do. Because as you follow him, he will light your path and you will know what it means to have the Zoe life. Another way of asking this is, will you trust me with everything? Will you trust me when I guide you? When my light shows you the next step, will you trust me? If you need to lay something down, change your attitude, respond differently to your instinct, will you trust me? You see, we all trust in something or someone. It's just, what is it that you are trusting in? And it's often in the difficulties of life that you realise what you're trusting in. For example, you get made redundant. What and who are you trusting in? You get a diagnosis that might be treatable, but also might not be. What or who are you trusting in? Money. I trust that as long as I have money in the bank, then I will be okay. My health, as long as I am healthy, then I will be okay. Relationships, as long as I have such and such in my life, then that's okay. I'll get through life. Life will be fine. But what about if we lose those things in our life? What is our root source when things don't go the way we want them to? When we face challenges, who do we trust and who do we follow? Because Jesus never promised us a life without challenge, hardship and difficulty. But what he does offer us, thankfully, is a light to follow that will bring us into a life that is full, rich, joyous, peaceful. John is sharing with us who Jesus is for a reason. And you all now know what that reason is. Rob perfectly quoted it last week for us in John 20, verse 31. But these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. You see, right back in Genesis 1, we read, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep. But then God spoke light. And that light brought vegetation, plants, life. There is a void in darkness. And in ourselves right now, you might recognize that feeling of emptiness. A feeling that no matter what you try in life, it doesn't satisfy. That things, people, experiences, they bring some sort of happiness, but it doesn't last. Money, relationships, objects, job, everything still leaves a void. As we see in Genesis, it was only in light that there was life. And he is offering us life by following him, by choosing his ways and trusting him regardless of anything or anyone else. Jesus also promises those who follow him freedom. John 8 verse 31 to 32, if you abide in my word, you are truly my disciples, and you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Knowing and dwelling in this life that you can know real freedom. Because as we follow his ways, he reveals to us through shining his light on the next step. And this can come through reading the word, through a preach, conversations with people, prayer. We can experience this life of freedom. For those who did go to New Wine a few years ago, you'll have come across a guy called John Mark Comer. And one of his talks there, I think it was on his first day, he was talking about transformation. And he asked this question, are you any different today to what you were last year? Are you more like God? Are you in a deeper relationship with God today than you were last year? And he said, you can't be the same. You can't say, well, actually, I'm probably about in the same place, because actually that means you've gone backwards, because we've now moved forward. But recognize that and answer instead, are you going to be different next year? Next week? Next month? How are you going to be more like Jesus and in a deeper relationship with him to where you are now? Because as John Mark rightly points out, that transformation, it doesn't just happen. You don't just think, oh, well, next year will be, I'm not going to change anything in my life. It's just, just going to happen. You cannot get there on your own willpower. Well, if I really try really hard doing this, or I really try hard doing this, it's not enough for that sustained transformation. But it is following the light, following Jesus in all the ups and downs, and choosing to do as he asks, even if it goes against your natural instincts. But like Ben shared last week about having this acquired taste, I believe it caused a lot of discussion about who likes what type of food. But if we get the idea of this acquired taste, the more we try something, the more we choose to follow Jesus in the difficulty, in the challenge, in whatever comes away, we will open ourselves up and experience life in a way that we have never experienced. We will find a freedom that we have never fully known, but it's taken one step at a time as Jesus shows you the next step. You can't just choose the bits you like. You could do, but you'll find yourself not walking in the light. You'll find yourself in darkness, feeling lost, maybe feeling empty, like something is missing. Matthew 7 verse 24, Jesus says this story. You might know the song as well, but I'm not going to sing it, of the wise and the foolish man who built their houses on the sand and the rock. What was the difference? Jesus says, everyone then who hears these words of mine and does them will be like a wise man who built his house on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not do them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. Don't just hear like the foolish man, but let's be doers of Jesus' words. As we are transformed, as we follow, we will also be a witness to the world around us. Matthew 5:14, it says, you are the light of the world. You are the light of the world. Let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. Does anyone have solar lights in their garden? So for those who don't know, solar lights absorb the sun's energy during the day and store it in a battery that can generate light once darkness falls. Some people are wise actually and take these to new wine with them. But the more time we spend with God, the more time we choose to make those decisions that might be hard, maybe even painful at times, as we choose to walk his way, going against the culture, ease and comfort by following Jesus, our light, the more we will reflect his light to the world around us. And this reminds me of Moses. When he would spend time with God, his face would glow so much that he had to wear a veil over his face when being with people. How much are we reflecting the light of our God in the world around us? Are we showing the Zoe life, full of energy, joy, peace, love, power? This can be at any age. Not just for the young, not just for the middle-aged, not just for the old, everyone. We can all have this Zoe life, no matter our age. Because it's a life that follows the light and spends time with the light, that it so reflects the light to the world around us. You see, we don't have to live in darkness. We don't have to be tripping over, getting ourselves lost. We can live in the light because Jesus defeated darkness. Darkness thought it had the victory when Jesus was crucified, but they were utterly mistaken when Jesus rose from the dead. John, in his introduction to his letter, has already declared the power of the light. in him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. He came as a witness to testify concerning that light, so that through him all might believe. He himself was not the light, he came only as a witness to the light. The true light that gives light to everyone was coming into the world. He was in the world, and though the world was made through him, the world did not recognize him. He came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. Yet, to all who did receive him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. Children born not of natural descent, nor of human decision or a husband's will, but born of God. What an amazing standing that we have. Jesus overcame darkness. Those who choose to follow him are called children of God. Not only that, but God has said he is our light, a light that will never go out. Don't live in the void. The darkness, the wilderness is never the final destination. Choose to follow, to trust him in all circumstances, for he will guide you into the fullness of life. And what does that look like? When you feel God is saying something, listen and do it. And it might be that actually you think, I don't know if this is God saying this to me. I'm not sure. That's okay. Speak to someone who you trust, who you know's wise in God, and you think, I'll go and speak to them and ask them to help me and pray with me. Be diligent in reading the word. I think Ben was saying, how this is a time when the Bible is so freely available, and yet it is probably least read than ever before. We've got such a gift. Let us read the Bible, be diligent, spend time talking to God and training yourself to recognize God's voice and leading. The more time you spend with God, the easier you will find it to know his voice. And be filled with the Holy Spirit. Not long after Jesus says, I am the light, we come across a man born blind. Jesus spits on the ground, makes some mud with his saliva, and puts it on the man's eyes. I don't think we think too much of that, because we think, well, it's Jesus' spit, mixing with the mud, putting on his eyes. But if someone did that to you, you'd be if someone spat on you full stop, you'd be like, that's gross. But here we are, Jesus puts this on his eyes, and he tells him, go and wash in the pool of Siloam. So the man went and washed and came home seeing. 4 times in this account, in some way, the question is asked, how did this blind man receive his sight? The blind man heard what Jesus said and did it. He knew the next step, and because he trusted, he received sight. And I bet he would say that day that he experienced life in a new way. Right now, you might already sense what God is saying or has been saying to you. It might be something you're trying not to remember right now, just pushing that thought out the way, can't be God. But inside something is happening, and God is trying to guide your next step. It might be God is asking you to do something, to change something, to put something right, to commit to something. Could be anything. It might just even be a subtle way that you are ignoring him. It might be that you don't know God right now, but you feel something's going on inside. Listen to what's going on. He is our light, and following his light brings life. In making that decision, you might think, that's not going to help me. I don't want to do that. But in following Jesus, it is always the best way. He will bring life. He will guide you on the next step, then the next step, then the next step, until your final destination. And we don't know when that is. But how amazing that we have a God who wants to guide us and wants to show us what's coming up, what's next, and wants to help us in that. Let's not ignore him. Let's not push him aside, but let's take note of what he's saying. Just to finish, just want us to take a few minutes to to just, just reflect on that really, ask God, are you saying anything to me right now? Is there anything I'm ignoring you? Just show it to me. Make it clear to me. If you're not sure, like I said, speak to someone. And then Carl's going to come up and we're going to just sing this song, I have decided to follow Jesus. And just really as a way of saying, yes, God, I'm choosing today, I might not have been doing that, but I'm choosing right now to say, you know what, I'm going to follow you. I'm going to follow you in this next thing that you're saying of me. I'm choosing to follow you, regardless of what that might look like. I'm choosing that. If you do want prayer for anything, you can always come to the front and we'll pray for you, or, speak to the person next to you. But let's just take this time to just not rush away, but just to really think, God, what are you saying to me right now? We hope that you've been blessed by this message. If you have any questions or comments, please contact us at www.kingschurchwirral.co.uk.